Alrighty, folks, tons coming up on today's show. Whoopi Goldberg says that black people in America have it the same as gay people in Iran. What does that say about a particular mindset? Plus, the Supreme Court rules that transing the kids can be banned in the states, and the Democrats go completely insane. Plus, the latest on Iran and President Trump's perspective on it. First, today has bravely chosen to self-identify as a holiday. We're celebrating the only way that makes sense by watching Am I Racist?, the official, and let's be honest, only good movie of Juneteenth. In theaters, it became the #1 documentary of the decade. On DailyWire Plus, it became the most watched piece of content in platform history. And now, thanks to an unverified but enthusiastic number of fans, it's being celebrated as the official movie of Juneteenth. So if you've already seen it, watch it again. If you haven't, today is your day of reckoning. Am I Racist?, the official movie of Juneteenth, streaming now only on DailyWire Plus. Also, my brand new book, Lions and Scavengers, is available pre-sale right now. Yes, you can get a signed copy only at dailywire.com/shop. It's a rallying cry against the lies poisoning our culture. Trust me, the scavengers will not like it. Again, that's dailywire.com/shop for signed copies. Well, folks, there's a perspective that has broken out into the open on both the horseshoe theory left and the horseshoe theory right that America sucks. America has always sucked. There's always been something wrong with the United States, and that wrongness continues today. There's a lot of crossover in these sort of two wings of American politics, but perhaps the most clear exemplar of this philosophy comes in the form of Whoopi Goldberg, sort of a pixelated version of this philosophy, a dumbed-down version of this philosophy. Yesterday on The View, which of course is a repository of nearly all human stupidity, she decided she was going to sound off about the Israel-Iran war. She, of course, is a believer that Iran is not all that bad, that they can be negotiated with, that there was never anything wrong with Iran, really. And if there was, well, you know, America has similar problems, so who are we to judge? Yesterday, she decided to talk about how, you know, the women in Iran who can be beaten for not wearing the proper head covering, who used to be able to hold particular jobs and no longer can hold those jobs in Iran, who've been repressed since 1979 by the fundamentalist Islamic regime in Tehran. She said, well, basically, that's the same as being black in America in 2025. And this is an astonishing claim.
And that's why I am saying that it is the same. Murdering someone for their difference is not good, whoever does it. It's not good.
Oh, the clapping seals.
So that's why I said you weren't saying what I heard was not what you meant.
I think it's very different to live in the United States in 2025 than it is to live in Iran.
Not if you're black.
Not for everybody.
Not if you're black.
Guys, don't go to Tehran.
That is absurd. Whoopi Goldberg is sitting there on the set of a nationally televised show, being paid millions of dollars after having been once an actress a long time ago. And she is saying that being black in America is akin to being a woman in Iran or a gay person in Iran. Okay, gay people in Iran are hanged from cranes. That is what happens to gay people in Iran. Whoopi Goldberg is feted for saying unbelievably low IQ, stupid things on a nationally televised show every single day. But apparently, that lack of perspective has become indicative of a broader trend in American life, which is to just whine about America, to crap on America. And it's not relegated to Whoopi Goldberg. Barack Obama did this a large part of his career as well, suggesting in 2008 that America actually always had great ideals. We just hadn't lived up to them. That was the unifying part. And then after he won, it turned into America kind of sucks, has kind of always sucked. And now it turns out, according to Barack Obama, America sucks even more than usual. He did an interview with the New York Times in which he suggested that we are drifting into something that is not consistent with American democracy. It's consistent with autocracies. It's consistent with Hungary under Orban. I mean, first of all, we should point out that there are, in fact, elections in Viktor Orban's Hungary. But beyond that, Barack Obama complaining about the twisting of the institutions of the United States against democracy, Barack Obama doesn't really get to talk about this, considering the fact that he used the federal government to threaten private industry very early on in his administration, that he used every aspect of his government in order to crack down on political opposition up to and including the IRS. But anyway, he says, we're not there yet completely, but I think we are dangerously close to normalizing behavior like that. And we need people both outside government and inside government saying, let's not go over that cliff because it's hard to recover. Now, again, President Obama, during his tenure, ran down America fairly routinely. He understood that Americans didn't like that very much, so he sort of prevented that from being spoken about publicly, or he himself tried not to say it all the time. In Dreams for My Father, his first autobiography, is a man who's written multiple autobiographies because, of course, he is so humble. He wrote in that first book, quote, I know I have seen the desperation and disorder of the powerless, how it twists the lives of children on the streets of Jakarta or Nairobi, in much the same way as it does the lives of children on Chicago's South Side, how narrow the path is for them between humiliation and untrammeled fury, how easily they slip into violence and despair. I know that the response of the powerful to this disorder, alternating as it does between a dull complacency and, when the disorder spills out of its proscribed confines, a studied, unthinking application of force, of longer prison sentences and more sophisticated military hardware, is inadequate to the task. Now notice, the tacit endorsement of the idea that black people living on the south side of Chicago, that's the same thing as impoverished children living on the streets of Jakarta, Indonesia, or Nairobi. Okay, that is an absurd contention, but that sort of moral relativism runs throughout, again, a large part of the left that suggests that America is historically bad, remains bad today. And this was a hallmark of the left throughout the Cold War era. There's really no difference between the United States and the Soviet Union. In fact, at least the Soviet Union, at least they are shooting for some form of equality. The United States is an unequal, terrible society. This is an argument that was made by the left. It is also an argument increasingly made by a sort of horseshoe theory right, which suggests that America is bad today. And it's bad for a wide variety of reasons, but it was bad historically in the past as well. And when Donald Trump says, make America great again, the reason that resonates for so many Americans, there are really two reasons. One is that when Americans hear, make America great again, what they believe is that there are American principles that are fundamentally great, and we ought to do a better job living up to them and implementing them. That what makes America great, for example, is, say, the Constitution of the United States and its ideals. That what makes America great are principles of limited government, private property, free speech, traditional values, right? That combination, that stew of Anglo-American ideals that applied uniquely in the United States, that's what made America great. We need to get back to that. That's what they hear when they hear make America great. That's sort of one way of hearing. The other way of hearing it is we think of great moments in American history and we say we want to be great like we were at that moment. Not that America was quote unquote greater in 1960 when segregation was still on the books in the South, or that America was greater in the 1850s when slavery was still practiced across half the country, but that there are moments in American history in which we have lived up to our great ideals and we should make America great again like that. We should have, for example, a unity of purpose like we did during World War II. That we should, for example, have an industrialized economy that is forward-thinking and forward-looking the way that we did in, say, the 1950s. Right? There's an idea that we have in our head when we say make America great again, and that's what President Trump is calling upon and appealing to. But there's a part of the right that really believes that America was never great, in the same way that the left agrees that America was never great. They believe, for example, that the expansion across the West in the early days of America was imperialist and colonialist, in the same way that the left claims that America is imperialist and colonialist. There's a part of the right that believes, like a part of the left, that the Civil War was wrongly fought, that it would have been better if the South had been allowed to keep slaves because, after all, an overweening federal government means broader federal power. There's a part of the right that believes, like a part of the left, that the Gilded Era in which American industry began to really grow and America became a world power economically was bad and exploitative, and that believes that the United States was bad in World War I, or that the United States was evil in World War II for dropping the A-bomb at the end of World War II, or that the United States was terrible during the Cold War because we opposed the communists too strenuously, and we'd been corrupted from the inside by globalists. Right? There is this part of the right that believes, like the left, that there is something fundamentally wrong with America, and it's been wrong for generations. That the post-Cold War era was characterized by American evil, that America is a bad force in the world, for example. Well, there are many problems with this perspective. The first and foremost of which is that it is historically wrong. America is the greatest force for human freedom in the history of the world. There is not really a close second. America is the greatest force for human prosperity in the history of the world. There really is not a close second. Why is this important? Because if you cannot define what makes America great or what made America great, if you're in the moral relativist category of suggesting, for example, that America is akin to Russia, both countries kill people, the sort of Michael Corleone cynical perspective in Godfather 1 when he says to Kay, well, senators have people killed too, which is a really puerile perspective. I know people like to cite the Michael Corleone speech to Kay in Godfather as though this is sort of a world-weary explanation of American politics. American senators have people killed just like dictators. No, they don't. Okay, I know Do you think that senators in the United States have the capacity to have people murdered? Just willy-nilly, the way that Vladimir Putin, for example, shoves people off of buildings in Russia. If you think that, it is because you are being deliberately obtuse or morally relativistic, or both. Okay, why does this matter? Because if you don't know what America is about, what makes America great, how do you defend it? Truly, how do you defend it? What are the principles that you are seeking to defend? This comes to a head when it comes to issues like immigration. Alrighty, in just a moment, we'll get to the immigration component of the dislike for America. It's very serious. It's one of the reasons why some people want open borders. First, Pure Talk, my wireless company, a veteran-led company, believes every man and woman who's faithfully served this country deserves to proudly fly an American flag made in America. And that's why Pure Talk is on a mission to give an allegiance flag, the highest quality American flag, to 1,000 U.S. veterans in time for the patriotic holidays. Of course, Independence Day is coming up very shortly. Just switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk this month. A portion of every sale will go to provide these high-quality flags to deserving veterans. With plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data, you can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill in half. The average family saves over $1,000 a year. I use Pure Talk for all my business calls. It's fantastic. You should do the same. You're going to be spending less money, great coverage. Head over to puretalk.com/Shapiro to switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Again, it's puretalk.com/Shapiro to support veterans and to switch to America's wireless company, Pure Talk. There's no reason to pay more for your cell phone coverage, really, and also support companies that don't particularly like you. Instead, head on over to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Also, my work schedule has been really, really busy as of late, especially because of the extended show. I need to make sure I'm still maintaining my health, hitting the gym, spending time with the family, even with the crazy schedule. Well, I've learned pretty quickly peak performance requires peak nutrition, not just tons of caffeine. That means eating enough fruits and veggies throughout the course of the day, wherever it may take me. That's why I'm so thankful to have Balance of Nature, which fits right into even the busiest of days. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and veggies every day. That sounds miserable and time-consuming. With Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and veggies daily. Balance of Nature takes fruits and veggies, they freeze-dry them, they turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. You take those fruit and veggie capsules every day, and your body knows precisely what to do with them. They're kosher, so I can pop it right into that protein smoothie and keep the gun show going strong. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get that free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. Again, balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer and that free bottle of fiber and spice. So again, it's very bizarre to watch some of the alliances that have formed with regard to immigration. They're not associated in the same way with sort of mass immigration and love of mass immigration. But, for example, Marco Rubio has suggested that the U.S. State Department is going to screen visa applicants for ideology, that we don't have to take into the country people who hate the country. This seems perfectly sensible to me. I do not understand in any way why this is controversial. If you come into the country believing that America is at root evil, terrible, historically bad force in the world, we don't want you here. You should not be here. There's no reason for you to be here. You can go elsewhere. There's some 190 countries on planet Earth. You can go to any of the other ones. But there is no reason why we should import groups of people who believe that America is bad. That seems weird to me that there's anyone who argues that the quote-unquote free speech rights of non-citizens ought to trump Americans' interest in not importing people who hate the country. And what's funny about this is there are, in fact, some people on the anti-immigration right who get very upset at Secretary Rubio for saying this. Because, of course, many of them agree with the principle that America is not so fundamentally great. In any case, Politico is reporting that U.S. diplomats have officially been directed to screen the social media and online presence of all foreign nationals applying for student and other educational visas. In the cable, consular officers are directed to review applicants' online presence for, quote, any indications of hostility toward the citizens, culture, government institutions, or founding principles of the United States. The cable also instructs embassies to flag, quote, any advocacy for, aid, or support for foreign terrorists and other threats to U.S. national security, and support for unlawful anti-Semitic harassment or violence. Support for Hamas is listed as a specific example. Now, this is the part where it gets kind of weird, is that, like, what is controversial about any of that? Why would it be good for the United States, for example, to import people who believe that black people are inferior? Would that be a good thing for us to do? Would it be a good thing for us to import supporters of terrorist groups in Africa or Asia? But if you mention that we probably shouldn't import people who support Hamas, then all of a sudden there are some people on the right who say this is a violation of free speech principles. Well, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. Actually, a pretty good indicator that you hate America is that you like Hamas. The crossover between those two principles is absolute. The Venn diagram is a circle. And yet you see people on left and right who are very upset with the State Department for saying this sort of stuff. The State Department, of course, is simply making the point that there are differences in culture and ideology. And again, that moral relativism that exists on both left and right that says America is inherently bad, what it leads to on the left is a call for mass migration. What it leads to on the right is the suggestion that we should never, ever stand up against people who hate the country if they hate the country in the right kind of way, which is a very strange proposition. Now, the left are the main proponents here. I mean, let's be clear. This is a fringe movement on the right. When I say horseshoe theory, you're talking about a fringe of the right and a vast bulk of the left. Okay, the left has been very forceful in its advocacy for mass migration. For example, Democratic Representative Maxwell Frost, he's calling for the mass amnesty of illegal immigrants in the United States.
And to my Republican colleagues who say, I don't want any undocumented people in this country, I actually agree with you. So let's document every single one of them with a speedy path to citizenship.
I mean, that is definitely one way of ending the illegal immigration problem, is by pretending that they don't exist by handing them documents. We can also get rid of murder as a crime in the country by considering murder not murder. We can just hand them documents saying, hey, murder isn't murder anymore, and then they're not murderers. Really cool. You just get rid of crimes by reclassifying the crimes. The only way to support this sort of thing, of course, this sort of mass amnesty proposition, is to suggest there's nothing unique about America that needs to be protected. And again, you see this across the mainstream left. Tim Walz was almost vice president of the United States. He was most recently spotted suggesting that China, the communist Chinese, ought to broker peace in the Middle East because America can't be trusted, which is about the greatest form of America whining I've seen recently. And he was asked about his anti-ICE rhetoric, the fact that he's been going after immigrations and customs enforcement. And he won't say that if he regrets that.
Governor, do you regret calling ICE agents the Gestapo?
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Ahead of the LA riots? Do you regret that language?
Thank you.
And bye. Catch you later. He, of course, had likened ICE to the Gestapo.
Governor, do you support the call to abolish ICE, Governor Walz?
No answer on abolishing ICE. Okay, that is what the Democrats... Why? Because in the end, they believe that there is nothing that must be protected about America, that the great American principle on the left is that America ought not exist as a separate polity from the rest of the world, or America bears some sort of blood guilt for what it is, and thus must have an open border. That seems to be the principle. Okay, and that lies behind much of the opposition to what the Trump administration is doing with ICE. So they're trying to misdirect this argument. They're trying to suggest that actually what's happening when the Trump administration enforces the law on immigration is some form of fascism, which, again, is an amazing statement. So Karen Bass, the incompetent mayor of Los Angeles, she said that LA is being used as a test case for federal fascism because President Trump has sent in the National Guard in order to protect ICE agents who are trying to enforce the law.
I think it's no secret that there was tension between the governor and the president. And I just think it's so unfortunate that we were the test case for this, considering that we are a city of immigrants, considering that there are sectors of our economy that are completely dependent on immigrant labor. And this was just not a problem before the raids took place. There were problems in LA once the raids happened, but they were problems that were completely manageable by local law enforcement. So there was no reason for this drama.
Okay, so, I mean, let's just point out here a few contradictions. One, she says there are entire swaths of LA that are reliant on immigrant labor. Wait, doesn't that undercut your minimum wage arguments? When you flood the labor market with cheap labor that is not regulated by law, doesn't that undercut your whole argument that the wages are too low? In any case, the notion that enforcing federal law is actually a violation of American principles, what would those principles be precisely? Meanwhile, MSNBC's Lauren Leader is calling ICE agents the Goon Squad now.
I think what is disturbing to so many Americans, as Rev said, it's not the deportation of people that may be criminals. It is the sense of lawlessness from this kind of goon squad that seems to be emerging from ICE and these sort of unnamed masked enforcers who are, at rallies, who are showing up and arresting people without warrants.
I mean, the Goon Squad? By the way, you don't have to have a warrant to arrest somebody in public for violating the law. That's not how that works, just legally speaking. But this has bled up to the highest levels of the Democratic Party. Elizabeth Warren was questioning Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and asking, would he send the Marines? Now, again, the idea being that America is uniquely evil if we send Marines to protect ICE agents in the pursuit of law enforcement.
Secretary Hegseth, if the president wanted to deploy Marines to Chicago and New York City like he did in Los Angeles, would you carry out that order even if the local governors and mayors objected?
Well, Senator, because Governor Newsom was unwilling to address
that's not
protecting
my question.
federal law enforcement agents in Los Angeles, President Trump had all the authorities, and the Defense Department happily supported defending our ICE agents in the conduct of their job. They have the right as Americans to be able to do their job without being attacked by mobs. And we will protect them in that process. And if other states needed it, we would provide that.
I know that you heard my question. So you would be willing to send troops if the president ordered it to Chicago, New York City? That's right.
Well, thankfully, New York City, unlike California, unlike Gavin Newsom, is willing to step up and address the issue with their local law enforcement.
Again, what she's asking there, I mean, Hegseth should just say yes. It does not require the local mayor or local governor to say yes to the National Guard being called out if there's been a violation of the Insurrection Act, for example, if the president invokes the insurrection. There are legal circumstances under which the president could do that. But again, the basic notion here is that people should be willy-nilly allowed to violate the law. And there's a philosophy that undergirds that, which is the law itself is bad. And if you enforce the law, this makes you bad. You're a representative of this terrible American government that, according to Whoopi Goldberg, treats black Americans like Iran treats gay people. Or an American government that treats illegal immigrants in the most horrific possible fashion. Again, this sort of perverse perspective on America has real consequences because you can't defend America if you don't like America at all. If you don't like America at all, what are you defending America from? This has been one of the signal features of the West for generations, is this sort of self-loathing that has taken root in large parts of the left and certain corners of the right. This self-loathing that says that the West ought not defend itself in any way, shape, or form. And we can't defend ourselves because, again, there's something deeply spiritually wrong with us. And whether you're claiming that spiritual ill stems from the use of atomic bombs at the end of World War II, as some have, or whether you're suggesting that the deep spiritual ill stems from America's lack of care and wonder at the transing of the children, the result is the same. You can't defend America unless you actually believe in America and unless you can name what it is that you believe about America that is worth defending. Fairly simple principle. And yet, unfortunately, it seems to escape a lot of people these days. Alrighty, coming up, the Supreme Court has decided that states can, in fact, ban the transing of the children, and the left is super angry about all of it. First, do you find yourself tossing and turning all night, constantly flipping your pillow to find the cool side? If you or your partner are hot sleepers, summer nights can become a battle between exhaustion and overheating. That restless cycle of too hot, too cold, never quite right, can leave you longing for the cool, comfortable sleep you deserve. With Bullet and Branch's best-selling Percale sheets, you'll finally get that cool sleep you have been craving. These aren't just any ordinary sheets. They're crafted with a special cooling weave using the finest 100% organic cotton that feels crisp and breathable against your skin. Even if you're the sweatiest sleeper in the house, you will stay comfortably cool all night long. Here's the best part. You can try them risk-free with their 30-night guarantee. No matter your bedroom style or mattress size, Boll & Branch has designs and colors to match perfectly. These all-season sheets start with breathable, unmatched softness, and it only gets better with every single wash. And I love Boll & Branch. When I'm on the road, I literally bring Boll & Branch materials with me. That's how good they are. Feel the difference for yourself without any catches or commitments. If these sheets don't deliver your best night's sleep, simply return them for a complete refund. No questions asked. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make. With Boll & Branch, get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com/Ben. That's Boll & Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/Ben to save 15%. Exclusions apply. See site for details. Also, you're probably great at protecting your personal information using strong passwords, two-factor authentication. Here's the reality. No matter how careful you are, your information exists in countless databases you can't actually control. Companies, medical offices, government agencies, they all have pieces of your personal data. They might not be protecting it the same way that you would be. That is where LifeLock comes in. They monitor millions of data points every second, watching for identity threats. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based LifeLock restoration specialist will handle the recovery process on your behalf, guaranteed, or your money back. Plus, all plans include their $1 million protection package, reimbursing you up to your plan's limits if you lose money due to identity theft. You can't control how others handle your info. You can help protect yourself with LifeLock. Producer Phil and his wife, they have LifeLock. They're feeling a lot more secure because they know their information is not compromised. Save up to 40% your first year. Call 1-800-LifeLock. Use promo code Ben or go to LifeLock.com/Ben for 40% off again. That's 1-800-LifeLock. Use promo code Ben or head on over to LifeLock.com/Ben for 40% off. Terms apply. Make your life more secure with our friends at LifeLock. Okay, meanwhile, as we mentioned yesterday, big victory for Matt Walsh, the DailyWire, the state of Tennessee, over at the Supreme Court. As we reported yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled that Tennessee can indeed ban transing of the children. One of the things that I think is most astonishing about this case is not actually the decision. The thing that may be the most astonishing about the case is the dissent in this particular case. The dissent is totally wild because what the dissent suggests is that if it had not been for President Trump, the Democrats would have been able to appoint a Supreme Court majority that says that it is illegal for a state to actually prevent the genital and hormonal mutilation of children. That is the position of Justice Sonia Sotomayor in her dissent. She suggests, quote, today, the court considers a Tennessee law that categorically prohibits doctors from prescribing certain medications to adolescents if and only if they will help a patient identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. Tennessee's law expressly classifies on the basis of sex and transgender status, so the Constitution and settled precedent require the court to subject it to intermediate scrutiny. The majority contorts logic and precedent to say otherwise, inexplicably declaring it must uphold Tennessee's categorical ban on life-saving medical treatment so long as any reasonably conceivable state of facts might justify it. Thus, the majority subjects a law that plainly discriminates on the basis of sex to rational basis review. In sadness, I dissent, says Justice Sonia Sotomayor. So much sadness. And then she proceeds to cite a bunch of horrible social science that is incorrect. Consider the parents who tell a Tennessee pediatrician their teenage child has been experiencing an unwanted but medically benign buildup of breast gland tissue. Again, the pediatrician's next move depends on the patient's sex. Identified male at birth, SB1 allows the physician to prescribe hormones to reduce the buildup of such tissue. But a child identified as female as birth, experiencing the same or more distress, must be denied the same prescription. That's, she says, that's discrimination. That if you're a girl and you want hormones to suppress your actual sex development, that is in some way the same as a boy who wants to suppress the development of breast tissue. That those need to be treated in the same exact way. And the majority in this case was 6-3. It is certainly possible that if it had not been for the election of Donald Trump, you would have a 5-4 majority in favor of the left on this. And that is really an astonishing thing. Chuck Schumer was trying to suggest that this decision was really awful. And I hope that Democrats own this. I really, really do. Here's Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, once again ripping into the Supreme Court.
You know, this Supreme Court seems to have forgotten that one of their jobs is to protect individual rights and protect individuals from being discriminated against. It's an awful decision.
Awful. Again, I hope that every Democrat embraces the Chuck Schumer position. I really do. I hope desperately that every single Democrat embraces that position and owns it, because the American people do not agree with it. Matt Walsh on this show yesterday correctly suggested that the Republicans should now push forward federal legislation that bans the transing of the minors across the board, linking federal funding to non-transing of the minors and such. And presumably Democrats would have to filibuster it. Good. Force them to filibuster it. Force them to own this insane position. Democrats are so out of touch on these particular positions, and forcing them to actually own it would be obviously the correct decision by Republicans of all stripes. Okay, meanwhile, the situation continues to percolate with regard to Israel and Iran. Yesterday, the Israeli military continued to strike a variety of Iranian positions, including the Iranian heavy water reactor in Iraq, as well as what it describes as a site used for the development of nuclear weapons in the city of Natanz, according to the Wall Street Journal. Israelis military told people to evacuate the central Iranian cities of Iraq and Khondab ahead of the strike. This is what they've been doing. One of the things that's been undernoticed about this war is that Israel has completely devastated the Iranian military positions, air defense positions, nuclear reactors, military positions. They have killed a minimum number of people, like truly a minimum number of people, like a couple hundred of people have died, and they're virtually all military targets. Because Israel has, once again, been warning its enemies, except for when it's hitting a missile launcher right after or right before it fires. So for all the people claiming that Israel is a genocidal state intent on the mutilation and murder of hundreds of thousands of people, I would like to see like one shred of evidence of that would be incredible. As opposed to what they actually are, one of the most targeted militaries in world history. What Israel is doing is historically successful. Now, meanwhile, the Iranians continue to simply fire missiles into heavily populated areas. Yesterday, the Iranians fired a missile at a hospital in the south of Israel. Miraculously, they happened to hit an abandoned building. So Israel had actually evacuated this old surgical center the day before. So there was no one in the surgical center when it took a direct hit from an Iranian missile. It was the Beersheba Soroka Medical Center. Gideon Sa'ar, the foreign minister, said the Iranian regime deliberately targets civilians. It's committing war crimes and has no red lines. There was also a kindergarten yard that was hit in the last Iranian barrage. And Israel's been shooting down the vast majority of these counterstrikes from Iran, along with its allies. Iran continues to pursue a war end that really does not seem tethered to reality in any way, shape, or form. President Trump has said to Iran, listen, you want this to stop? Very simple. Just give up your nuclear program. That's it. That's the whole thing. Now, again, President Trump has been clear about this since 2011. It is amazing to me how many people on the right seem to believe that President Trump shifted his position. No, maybe you did, but he didn't. In 2011, he was tweeting out that Barack Obama should get out of the way and let Israel do what it needed to do against the Iranian nuclear facilities. Well, again, President Trump continues to play this masterfully. Yesterday, he did yet another press conference in which he said, listen, there's not going to be a nuclear weapon in Iran. That's how this works.
Well, I don't want to get involved either, but I've been saying for 20 years, maybe longer, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I've been saying it for a long time. And I think they were a few weeks away from having one. And they had to sign a document. I think they wish they signed it now. It was a fair deal. And now it's a harder thing to sign, you know. It's a lot of water over the dam. But, you know, it's very, I say it very simply, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Too much devastation. And they'd use it. You know, I believe they'd use it.
Okay, well, again, that happens to be a perspective shared by some 80% of Americans, that the Iranians should not have a nuclear weapon, and that if they had a nuclear weapon, they would try to use it against Israel. When people say they want to kill you, you probably should at the very least believe them. Okay, President Trump was asked what exactly he's looking for. His answer was victory.
He said I was going back home to make a ceasefire. Not a ceasefire. We're long beyond ceasefire. And I said, why do you say that? Why would you say ceasefire? It's a bad term to use. Because a ceasefire means like everything's going swimmingly, we'll take a little time off. It's not. We're not looking for a ceasefire. We're looking for a total, complete victory.
Now, again, Iran could simply do this. Iran could today come out and say, listen, the Americans can come in. They can blow up Fordow from like on the ground. We'll have inspectors from the United States to oversee the dismantling of our nuclear program. And then everything is hunky-dory for them. No one has been calling for regime change as the actual goal here. The goal is the denuclearization of Iran. Period. End of story. That can happen with the Ayatollahs in power. It can happen with the Ayatollahs out of power. None of this, by the way, implies a heavy nation-building effort. And all the people who are being intellectually dishonest suggesting that anyone mainstream has been calling for the full-scale occupation of Iran with like hundreds of thousands of American troops is lying to you and has been lying to you. That was never a war goal of either the Israelis. The population of Israel is less than 10 million. It's 1,500 miles from Iran. What do you think? The Israelis are going to occupy Iran, a country of 91 million people? That's what they're, or America is interested in occupying? Like, who are you talking about? You're talking about President Trump, who explicitly campaigned in 2016 against the Iraq war and the occupation of Iraq. Who are you even talking about? Who are you talking to? The answer is you're talking to no one. You're talking to yourselves. You're setting up a straw man in order to somehow make a couple of bunker busters dropped on Fordow akin, in some bizarre way, to the full-scale occupation for 20 years of Iraq. You're going to need to do better than that. That is a particularly crappy argument because it is not an argument that has anything to do with reality. The only people backing off their positions these days, as I see it, are the people who 5 minutes ago were suggesting World War III was going to break out if Israel struck the Iranian nuclear reactors, and who have now backed into the position of saying, well, you know, if President Trump allows Israel to do what they're doing or does a strike, really, we didn't back off our positions. You did, because you wanted full-scale regime change with occupation on the ground. No one was ever saying that. No one. Really. It's pretty amazing. Okay, President Trump says, you know, you keep saying this is going to end slowly. Maybe it'll end very quickly. Again, this is what Trump is not a person who wishes to engage in nation building. He is not. I don't know where, and his position's been very clear for decades. No nuclear weapon. Destroy the nuclear facilities. That's it. Has President Trump ever suggested that he wants a full-scale occupation of Iran? If so, when? Please name the time. He's been consistent. You have not. End of story.
I did ask Tucker. I said, well, are you okay with nuclear weapons being in the hands of Iran? And he sort of didn't like that. He didn't want to really, but he sort of didn't like that. And I said, well, if it's okay with you, then you and I do have a difference. But it's really not okay with him. Therefore, you may have to fight. And maybe it'll end, very quickly. But there's no way that you can allow, whether you have to fight or not, you can allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, because the entire world will blow up.
So, I mean, again, that seems like a very simple answer to what is a very stupid question. When President Trump says, is the world better off with an Iranian nuclear weapon or not? That is a proposition that 80% of Americans agree with, that Iran should not go nuclear. Period. End of story. That's the whole thing. And when asked, President Trump said, my supporters are for me. Like, anybody who's suggesting there's like a fundamental break here, there's no fundamental break.
Have you seen the Tucker Carlson and Senator Ted Cruz interview? It seems like this issue on whether or not the United States should strike is kind of dividing a lot of your supporters.
No, my supporters are for me. My supporters are America first. They make America great again. My supporters don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. Tucker's a nice guy. He called and apologized the other day.
Okay, well, again, if President Trump is telling the truth there, which I assume he is, kind of an astonishing move for Tucker Carlson to call and apologize. And good for Tucker for calling and apologizing. Alrighty, coming up, the Democrats are in serious, serious trouble. I will explain precisely why. First, here's something that will blow your mind. Over 85% of the grass-fed beef in your grocery store, it's imported. Yep, from overseas, where they have completely different safety standards than we do here in the United States. And that's exactly why people in my office are switching on over to Good Ranchers. Look, people in my office are grilling every weekend this summer, and they want to know exactly where their meat is coming from. At GoodRanchers.com, every single cut, whether it's beef, chicken, or pork, is 100% born, raised, harvested right here in the United States from local family farms. No antibiotics ever, no added hormones, no seed oils, just pure, clean American meat. Here's the best part. They deliver it straight to your door. No more wondering if you're getting quality meat at the grocery store. No more long lines. Again, producer savvy, she has a big boy. Okay, he's a little kid, big boy. He loves the meat from Good Ranchers. This kid is growing at like 3 times the normal rate because of Good Ranchers. If you subscribe to any Good Ranchers box, you get your choice of free meat for life. I'm talking free Wagyu burgers, hot dogs, bacon, chicken wings in every single box for as long as you're subscribed. Plus, when you use my code Ben at GoodRanchers.com, you'll save an extra $40 off your order. Right now is the perfect time to start making your summer barbecues more high quality and more convenient. Head on over to GoodRanchers.com, use my code Ben for that $40 off and free meat for life. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. President Trump continues to maintain, maybe he'll strike, maybe he won't. That is his prerogative as president.
It's a shame could have been done the easy way.
Do you think the regime there could fall?
Sure, anything could happen, right? Of that? Sure, that could happen. Yeah.
Now, again, President Trump is not calling for the regime to fall. He's not suggesting that he even wants to topple the regime. He's saying if the bombing continues, the regime could fall, which obviously is true. The Israelis actually hacked Iranian TV, and they put in footage of Iranian women being able to cut their hair and all of the rest. They've been killing many of the chiefs of police in major cities around Iran in order to get rid of the possibility of Iranian troops shooting people in the streets if they decide that they no longer want the Ayatollahs there. But any sort of movement to get rid of the Ayatollahs is going to have to be domestically led. It's going to have to be led by the population of Iran. Again, the sole goal here for both Israel and the United States is the denuclearization of Iran. Meanwhile, Ayatollah Khamenei, he keeps saying over and over and over that Iran is not going to surrender. He said, quote, the Iranian nation stands firm against an imposed war. First of all, we should point out the Iranian nation is not represented by the Iranian government. Okay, the Iranian government is, in fact, a dictatorship that does not give a crap about its people and shoots them in the streets if they oppose it. He says, the Iranian nation stands firm against an imposed war, just as it will stand firm against an imposed peace, and this nation will not surrender to anyone in the face of imposition. Intelligent people who know Iran, the Iranian nation and its history, will never speak to this nation in threatening language because the Iranian nation will not surrender. And the Americans should know that any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly cause irreparable harm to them. Okay, so here we should deal with the possibility of what Iran could do in response, right? Because you can certainly have a calibrated discussion about risks and rewards when it comes to military action. Israel has done an extraordinary job of taking out the missile launchers in Iran. Iran has terror groups in places like Iraq. Theoretically, they could fire on U.S. military bases in Iraq. President Trump has been evacuating military personnel from places like Iraq and places like Syria in the expectation that if he should decide to drop a couple of Moabs on Fordo, that possibly Iran would activate some of those terrorist groups to fire on American bases. Now, that would be the stupidest move Ayatollah Khamenei ever made. Let's be clear about that. If the Ayatollah decided that in response to the bombing of his nuclear facility, he was going to launch full-scale assaults on American troops, he would be dead by morning. It is that simple. He would be dead. And there is no leadership structure to pick up the pieces afterward. So if he wants his regime to actually end, that would be an amazing way of making sure that his regime actually ends. That would be effectively a suicide pact if he legitimately attempted a full-scale attack on American installations or American military personnel. But President Trump is being careful. He, of course, wants to protect American lives, as is his duty. And so he has been, for example, shifting around troops apparently at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. He's been moving American personnel out of Syria. He's essentially clearing the ground so that if America decides to use a B-2 and take out Fordo, that there won't be anything coming the other way, which again is smart of the President of the United States. And I think enough of a deterrent exists that even if President Trump decided not to do it, it would still make sense because the reality is that it would certainly not be in the Ayatollah's interest to go further in this war once Fordo is gone. He then has nothing to bargain with at that point. What's amazing about all of this is that if Iran came to the table and just gave up its nuclear program, the regime likely survives, at least in some form, for a couple of more years. Instead, he seems to be accelerating his own demise by taking these sort of intransigent stands. President Trump offered him every way out for months. For literally 2 months, he offered him a way out. And the Ayatollahs would not take it. Okay, what's the possibility of other Iranian response? As we talked about yesterday on the show, theoretically, Iran could activate its terrorist friends around the world to attack Americans or Jews or Europeans or whomever. That's always a possibility. Iran can do that at any time. Does that mean that the United States, for example, should have left ISIS in place because there were ISIS-associated people who engaged in terror attacks? When we say, broadly speaking in the West, that we should not negotiate with terrorists, what we mean is that if you can be deterred from taking out full-scale terrorist groups by the possibility that terrorist groups are going to do bad things, you've lost already. There's no purpose to having an American military, for example, if the basic idea is that Iran can at any time activate a terror cell, and therefore we should allow them to go nuclear. And this is why President Trump is so clear. He's so clear on this, and his clarity is so refreshing. He has one agenda and one agenda only. He says it over and over and over again for decades. No nuclear Iran. Period. End of story. That's the agenda. And the reality is that if you're at the head of the world's most powerful military, and if you don't even have the ability to stop the Iranian nuclear program, once the Israelis have already taken out all of the advanced weaponry, taken out all of the air defense systems, destroyed on the ground the top layers of the Iranian military, ripped apart 90% of the Iranian nuclear facilities. If the United States does not have the capacity, if this is a capacity or courage question, how the hell do you hope to deter China from taking over Taiwan? Seriously, that's an actual military challenge. You want to stop China from taking over Taiwan in credible ways? Well, at some point, you might have to actually sign into chat and demonstrate that our threats are credible. Can you imagine a world in which the United States can be put off of ending the Iranian nuclear program by Iran saying things while they are lying defenseless at the feet of the Israeli government and the Israeli military? You know, what would our enemies take away from that? That is a real concern, if you believe, as I do, that Joe Biden's cowardly, ridiculous pullout from Afghanistan led full scale to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that the reason Russia never invaded Ukraine under Donald Trump is because they were afraid of Donald Trump, which is, I think, true. People have to remain afraid of you. And that means that you have to credibly be able to threaten the use of force. Again, there has never been a clearer time when the American use of military force seems to be so results effective and so low risk. Now, again, that doesn't mean no risk. Of course there's risk in any military operation. Of course there's risk of blowback and people responding. Of course that's true. But the United States has had as a central goal, both Democrat and Republican, for decades, the non-nuclear Iran. That has been a goal of foreign policy in the United States for decades. If, after Israel clears all the ground, you can't take a B-2 and hit with a couple of Moabs, if you're deterred, how in the world do you expect to deter China? How do you expect to deter Russia? How do you expect to deter anyone? That is a serious credibility question. Now, one of the other sort of concerns that's been raised is what happens if Ayatollah Khamenei falls? Right, the Wall Street Journal points out that Iran's embattled leaders have found themselves in an existential struggle domestically to protect nearly a half century of rule as Israel pounds the military, government, and population. The U.S. and Israel have made it clear that even Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, could be a target. President Trump himself posted on social media, quote, "We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He's an easy target, but is safe there. We're not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now." Now, what if the regime were to fall? What if the regime were to collapse? I mean, first of all, it is amazing what Israel has been able to accomplish here. If you look at like a chart of the people at the top of the Iranian structure who have been killed, it includes the chief of staff of the armed forces, the commander of Khatam al-Anbiya at central headquarters, the IRGC commander-in-chief, the IRGC Aerospace Force commander, the IRGC Surface-to-Surface Missile Array commander, the IRGC Aerospace Force Aerial Unit commander, the IRGC Aerospace Force UAV Force commander, the IRGC Intelligence Chief, the IRGC Deputy Intelligence Chief, the IRGC Quds Force Intelligence Chief, and the IRGC Quds Force Deputy Intelligence Chief. That's who Israel has killed over the course of the last week. The only living members left of the entire regime, essentially, are the Supreme Leader, as well as the IRGC Quds Force commander. That's it. That's the whole list. Okay, so the question at this point becomes, what happens next? Now, I know there are a lot of people who are concerned about what happens next. I don't think that's our business. I actually don't. I'm of the Angelo Codevilla view. I know Angelo Codevilla was a professor at Claremont, and he used to say one of the big mistakes about Afghanistan and Iraq was not deposing Saddam Hussein. The problem in Iraq is that we disbanded the Iraqi military and then got in the way of whatever rebuilding was supposed to happen. He said with regard to Afghanistan, the problem was not deposing the Taliban. The problem was we then decided to involve ourselves in nation building as opposed to just knocking over the Taliban. And whatever happens next happens. And then if we don't like the next leader, we knock him out too. And if it requires that every so often we go in and we kill their leadership, okay, you can do that too. Okay, to protect America, this is what you do. And it doesn't require long-term occupations. I think that is actually a fairly realist point of view when it comes to American foreign policy. You do what you have to do to protect American interests for the foreseeable future, and that does not mean long-term nation-building prospects. But there is this bizarre idea that is set in the aftermath of Iraq and Afghanistan that all regime change is inherently bad. Now, some regime change is bad. For example, I don't think that Libyans toppling Muammar Gaddafi was a good thing for the United States, and I opposed it at the time. I do not think that the fall of Mubarak in Egypt to the Muslim Brotherhood was a good thing. However, are we supposed to pretend that all regime change is bad? Literally all? Because if the idea is that whatever chaos follows in the wake of a regime change is always worse than a regime change, you're now making a case for the status quo for every evil dictatorship on the planet. This is a point made by the Israeli ambassador to the United States.
Chris, we're not in the business of regime change. I said that if, as a result of our self-defense, the people rise up, which they've done repeatedly, the problem is that this regime of tyrants has shot them in the back. You know, there's 15,000 political prisoners imprisoned by the Ayatollahs in Tehran. So we're very, very clear with our objective, and that's to prevent a nuclear Iran. If, as a result of our activities, the Iranian people find the opportunity to race towards freedom instead of a nuclear bomb, then so be it, and we will have done something good for humanity.
Okay, as Leiter points out, the idea that all regime change is bad, well, I mean, the bringing down of Hezbollah in Lebanon has led to a better Lebanese government. The bringing down of Assad has led to the rise of an HTS government, which is still questionable in a lot of serious ways, but a government that is significantly friendlier to President Trump and the United States. President Trump himself will say so. And that's just in the last year or so. Not every regime change is bad, and nation building is not required. There is no clue that if you break it, you bought it. Is the idea that you can never go to war with any country at all because you have some sort of vested interest in that country remaining as it is? Was regime change bad in Nazi Germany or Japan? Was regime preservation in South Korea a bad thing? Was regime change good in Vietnam? Right? Like, every case is different. Every case is different. And the best thing you can do in foreign policy is avoid the most bad outcome. And right now, the most bad outcome is the Ayatollahs with a bomb. That's it. That's the worst outcome. Avoiding that outcome is the key here. If the Ayatollahs fall and there's no bomb, that is still a better outcome than Ayatollahs with a bomb. Okay, that I think is the foreign policy of the United States and should be the foreign policy of the West more broadly. Now, meanwhile, Democrats, of course, are siding with that horseshoe theory right and suggesting that this is just terrible, that everything that's happening in the Middle East is terrible right now. The denuclearization of Iran by force is terrible. Democratic Senator Welch, he is from Vermont. Okay, again, if you find yourself in solidarity with Bernie Sanders on foreign policy, let me suggest that you're doing it wrong. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont, who is, again, a Bernie Sanders type Democrat from Vermont, he says we should be taking care of America first, sounding very much like some of the voices on the horseshoe theory right.
Do we want to get engaged in Netanyahu's policy when there's no restraining what he ultimately will do? We should be taking care of America first.
Now, again, I don't know what that means in this particular context. I also agree that we should be taking care of America first. We are doing that with like trillions of dollars a year. I'm confused as to how taking out the Iranian nuclear program with one bombing run is somehow equivalent to not paying attention to America's problems. Should we disband the American military, generally speaking? I mean, this is a really ideological question. Should we disband what is the military for? Should we disband it? We spend trillions of dollars a year on it. Should we just disband it utterly? Because after all those dollars could be used for Social Security or whatever. Is that the goal? Like, what is the goal here? What is the end state that you seek? Do you view American foreign policy as important in any way, shape, or form? And as far as the idea the United States is tethered to whatever Benjamin Netanyahu says or does in Iran, how so? Truly, I want to understand that. Please explain to me how, let's say that Benjamin Netanyahu decided he wanted a full-scale American invasion of Iran. You think President Trump goes for that? Are you out of your mind? Okay, first of all, Netanyahu has not called for that. If he did, you think Trump goes for that? Benjamin Netanyahu apparently wanted to go after Iran months ago, and President Trump was not particularly friendly toward it. Did the United States go along with all of that? All of these are straw men. They're just burning straw men. Democratic Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, he's now suggesting that Netanyahu's decision to launch a war against Iran is threatening Americans' safety. So I guess his suggestion is that America is safer with the Ayatollahs with a bomb.
Mr. Secretary, as the chairman has said, this is a dangerous moment. As we speak, missiles are striking cities across Israel and Iran, threatening to ignite a regional war. There should be no doubt that for the safety of the United States and the rest of the world, Iran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to preemptively launch a war with Iran against the urging of the president threatens the stability of the entire region and the safety of Americans stationed there.
So, again, the idea here from this doltish, cloddish Democrat is that somehow taking out the nuclear facilities is bad. Trust the Iranians. Okay, well, President Trump does not. President Trump has made clear his perspective, and trying to cite things in the name of President Trump that he has not said and is not saying is a hell of a move. Again, listen, there are times when I disagree with President Trump on this program. It's not infrequent. But I'm not trying to speak in his name. What does President Trump really mean? What is President Trump really trying to say? He's saying exactly what he wants to say. He's doing exactly what he wants to do. He's not being manipulated from the outside. That sort of perverse perspective is very, very silly in the extreme. Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate de-escalation leading to a ceasefire because, of course, he did. Of course he did. Has there ever been an evil power on planet Earth the United Nations will not stand for? The United Nations is the most isolated of international politics, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And this is what they are. That is not a shock at all. One of the many reasons why I hope that before President Trump leaves office during his second term, I hope that President Trump leaves the UN, just cuts it dead. It is the worst organization. It is a trash organization. You want to talk about wasting billions of dollars a year? If we're cutting USAID, we should just cut the UN completely. What a joke that organization is, truly. Well, meanwhile, the Democrats are in trouble. According to the New York Times, the DNC is in chaos and desperate for cash. Uh-oh, sad things happening. Just months into the tenure of a new party leader, Ken Martin, the DNC has grown so bleak, top officials have discussed whether they might need to borrow money this year to keep paying the bills. Fundraising from major donors, some of whom Mr. Martin has still not spoken with, has slowed sharply. At the same time, he's expanded the party's financial commitments to every state, even to Guam. Fellow Democrats are grumbling that Martin, who quietly accepted a raise after taking the post, has been badly distracted by internal battles. So far, they say he's been unable to help unite his party against Republicans who control the federal government. So they have a really, really big problem over at the DNC. So given the fact that there was a bare-knuckles fight for the chairmanship, Martin has been pushing allies. His enemies are mad. They're walking out because of a giant grab bag of cash, but not anymore. I guess all the cash is gone. 6 people briefed on the party's fundraising, according to the New York Times, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss its finances, frankly, said big donors had been very slow to give to the party this year as Martin solicits contributions. His commitment to state parties, which amounts to $1 million in monthly spending, has further strained the finances. So it appears that Democrats may now be in the position of having to borrow money in order to pay their bills, very much like their fiscal policy, which is exciting stuff. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep an eye on this New York City mayoral race, because if New York turns to this psychotic, socialistic, spoiled brat man-child, Zohran Mamdani, the New York State representative, who held a real job for about 2.7 seconds as the privileged scion of a Columbia University professor and a Hollywood director, before his theatrical run for mayor of New York, if they elect this guy, I'm going to enjoy watching New York City melt down, truly. Like, you get what you deserve. I'm very much on board, again, with the H.L. Mencken idea that democracy is the theory, that the people get what they vote for good and hard. If you vote for Zohran Mamdani, man, and your entire tax base flees, then good luck to you, New York, truly. We will welcome all of your rich people down to Florida, increasing our tax base. Sounds great. Bill Ackman says it only takes a handful of successful people to leave to decimate the city's tax base. Well, that's true. That is true. Okay, meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani, who, again, has engaged with every anti-Semitic group he can find, tweeted in 2020 that queer liberation means free Palestine, which is a very weird statement. This person, who has chanted globalize the Intifada, and then suggested that Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state, now he's crying about it. This is where we are. This is the person you guys are thinking about electing mayor of New York. This one. A man who fakes tears. Honest to goodness, the fake tears, I can't deal with it at all. It is unmanly. Okay, it's unmanly. It just is. There are good reasons to cry. Your parents died. Your dog got hit by a car. Something bad's happening to your kids. Like, those are real reasons to cry. You know it's not a reason to cry? Someone called you an anti-Semite when it turns out you're kind of an anti-Semite. Here's Zohran Mamdani faking tears.
I get messages that say the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim.
No, you don't. Show us.
Threats on my life. On the people that I love. And I try not to talk about it. Because the function of racism, as Toni Morrison said, is distraction. My focus has always been on making this a city that's affordable, on making this a city that every New Yorker sees themselves in. And it takes a toll, because this is a city that every single person deserves to be in. It's a city that we all belong to. And the thing that's made me proudest in this campaign,
wipe your eyes, man. Yeah,
is that the strength of our movement is built on our ability to have built something across Jewish and Muslim New Yorkers, across New Yorkers of all faiths and all backgrounds and all boroughs. And anti-Semitism is such a real issue in the city. And it has been hard to see it weaponized by candidates
Weaponized.
who
So
do not seem to have any
so
sincere
hard.
interest in
Oh
tackling
my gosh.
it,
World's
rather in
fairest
using it
violent.
as a pretext to make political points.
Oh my God. Oh my God. This is the one you want, really? This is what you want in New York? Fake crime. It's anti-Semitism has been weaponized. Not by my friends who hate Jews, but by people who say that anti-Semitism is bad and that I'm one of them. It's so, it's so sad. You know what I need? I need a mashup at some point. Editors, I'm calling upon you. I need a mashup of all the Democrats fake crying. From Bill Clinton fake crying to Gavin Newsom fake crying. Is this like a Republican thing? I don't remember a lot of Republicans doing the Has Donald Trump ever come close to crying publicly? I do not think that he has. Like ever. Not once, as far as I'm aware. But it seems like every Democrat, it's like part of the rehearsal process. Can you cry on cue? Go, cry. Let's see some tears, boy. Let's do it. Like what are we even talking about? It's like every single Democrat, every major Democrat has to do the I'm so saddened. Oh, the tears welling up front. Honestly, the only man I know who can fake cry on command is Matt Walsh. And that's because Matt is kind of an actor. Right? I mean, like he actually tried to do it in Am I Racist, I believe. And it was pretty effective. But he's the only one. I don't know anyone else. It's like amazing. These are the people. These are the ones the Democrats have chosen. Okay, well, good luck with that. Well, meanwhile, the Democrats boycotted a hearing yesterday over the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental decline. Again, one of the great scandals in American history. Republicans have been holding a Senate hearing on this. Senate Democrats staged a near total boycott of a Republican-led Senate hearing on Wednesday on Joe Biden's mental decline and its alleged cover-up during his presidency, according to The Guardian. The only senator who attended was Peter Welch of Vermont, who, again, is very bored. There's nothing happening in Vermont. They've got like some cows and some grass, and that's it. So he's like, okay, I'll show up. But everyone else was not showing up. The hearing was titled Unfit to Serve, How the Biden Cover-Up Endangered America and Undermined the Constitution. It began with the Democratic ranking member, Dick Durbin, launching a counterattack on President Trump's off-kilter comments before walking out of the chamber. Yes, they must walk out. Durbin said, if we're going to make a question of cognitive ability, I think we should consider what happened in Alberta, Canada, just this week. And then he tried to claim that President Trump is mentally unfit. Okay, this is not going to work for you guys. Really, it's not going to work for you. Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, she's like, good try, guys, but you trying to avoid culpability for covering up the fact that the president of the United States was brain dead for a couple of years there is not going to work.
I'm on my way down to Judiciary Committee. We have a hearing on who was really in charge at the White House while Joe Biden was president, who had that auto pen, what was happening with his health. And, I think the Democrats are already throwing the towel in on this one. They didn't even call a witness. It's going to be interesting. Stay tuned.
So it will be interesting. And I hope to see what Democrats have to say about who knew what when it came to our brain-dead, non-functional president. Just an amazing thing that is a real thing that happened in American life, and we're not even paying attention to it anymore. Like, this is how fast the news moves now. We had a president who was legitimately non-functional for 2 full years. We have no idea who the actual president of the United States was, and it may have been his formerly coke-addled son and his wife. I have descriptors for her, but I'll leave them out. And somehow that is not, like, we moved beyond it. We're goodness gracious. The timeline is too fast at this point. And meanwhile, on the economy, Jay Powell of the Federal Reserve, as expected yesterday, said that he would not be lowering the interest rates. He says we have to hold off and see what's going to happen with the tariffs.
And what we're waiting for to reduce rates is to understand what will happen with really the tariff inflation. And there's a lot of uncertainty about that. Every forecaster you can name who is a professional, forecaster with adequate resources and forecasts for a living is forecasting pretty significant. Everyone that I know is forecasting a meaningful increase in inflation in coming months from tariffs because someone has to pay for the tariffs.
Well, he's right about that, but we'll have to see what happens with the tariffs. President Trump, of course, wants the inflation to come down. He also wants the interest rates to come down. President Trump seems to be now negotiating off-ramps with regard to these tariffs. I very much, of course, hope that he does, because I think that if he does, and if we leave a significant tariff on China and reshape the world economy, and if he continues to credibly pursue the kinds of policies he is currently pursuing on foreign policy, meaning boxing in China, credible threats of military force when necessary, and all the rest. If he does all of that, then we are looking at a very solid economy going forward. Foreign policy and domestic policy intertwine here. If you want free shipping lanes, if you want to ensure that nefarious foreign powers can't undermine the global economy and global currencies, you do have to flex at some point. And by the way, one of the things that is happening with regard to Iran here that's actually quite important is the breaking of a couple of bizarre complexes that the United States has engaged in for a while. One is the Iraq War complex, which is the idea that anytime America involves itself anywhere militarily, it turns into Iraq, which is not true. Sort of the equivalent to the Vietnam War complex that dominated America from the end of the Vietnam War to the Gulf War for about 16 years. And then secondly, if President Trump does in fact take out Fordo, or if the Israelis finish taking out Fordo, whatever it is, the idea that nuclear negotiations are the way to end a nuclear threat, that obviously goes by the wayside as well. And credible military threats are reassured, which is a very, very good thing. Now, speaking, by the way, of the economy, it is worth noting that according to a new report released on Wednesday, Social Security and Medicare will run out of money in less than a decade. If Congress does not overhaul the program's financing, automatic cuts will slash Social Security benefits by 23%, Medicare hospital benefits by 11% in 2033. Now, realistically, is any of that going to happen? No, of course not. The federal government is just going to borrow more money, is what's actually going to happen, until we can't borrow money anymore. And that is the big question. How long can we borrow the money? This is a bipartisan problem. This is not unique to President Trump. It is not unique to the Democrats. Everyone has been kicking the can down the road on the entitlements, pretending away all the problems there. It is the ticking time bomb underneath the American economy. At some point, someone is going to have to do something about it. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. Coming up, the Pope is questioning the problems with AI. Plus, what's the problem with screens? Is it the screens themselves, screen time itself, or something else? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.